Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the APTA Ridership Trends Dashboard. I'm Matt Dickens, APTA's Senior Policy Analyst. We're so excited to have partnered with Transit to create our APTA Ridership Trends Dashboard. We hope this new tool will provide a lot of value to APTA members and the whole industry by providing insight into the developing ridership picture. And joining me this afternoon is David Block-Schachter, Transit's Chief Business Officer. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Matt. So it's been a lot of fun to work together these last couple months, and I'm super excited to get to share the results of what we've built together with everyone, and also excited to wear both a collared shirt and a jacket for the first time in almost a year. For those who don't know me, I'm David. I'm the Chief Business Officer at Transit. We're the leading transit journey planning mobile app in North America, and I've also been on the other side as the former CTO of the MBTA in Boston. So this webinar, just to give you a sort of lay of the land, will be about 20 minutes of presentation, followed by a question and answer session. Matt will start off by talking about APTA's goals in this collaboration. Then I'll take over and talk a bit more about the what and how, and then demo this new way to track ridership trends that APTA and Transit have built together. Matt will present some examples of interesting findings, and then we'll take your questions. Throughout this presentation, please use the Q&A function within Zoom to ask questions. At the end, we'll go through all of them and answer everything that we can. And just a reminder that if you're shy and you don't want your question answered during the webinar, you can email us directly either at partners@transit.app or statistics@apta.com. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Matt to start us off.
Thanks, David. We know that the industry, the media, and the public use our traditional ridership reporting to look at national trends and compare peer systems and regions. However, the data lags by several months due to the time needed to collect and compile that data. Agencies know their own data in real time, but the current situation with the COVID-19 pandemic meant that there was value in adding something to the ridership data space. So we wanted to create this dashboard in order to provide something even more up to the minute than the existing APTA ridership report. Individual agencies probably have week-to-week information on their own ridership trends, and some do a very good job posting that information publicly. But we wanted to create a resource to apply that level of detail to as many transit agencies as we could. So what can you use the dashboard for? Maybe you're a transit agency looking at how your ridership is performing in comparison to peer systems in cities. As the vaccine rollout continues and trip patterns change, we expect that transit ridership is going to return at different rates across the country. And so you'll be able to see how ridership is performing in different places at different agencies across the nation. Transit industry businesses can use the ridership patterns in the dashboard to understand the industry as a whole, including how ridership has been impacted across different cities and regions, depending on what the city's like, what kind of transit service agencies operate, things like that. Or maybe you're a member of the media who's looking to see how ridership has changed throughout the pandemic and get the latest information on how ridership levels are improving. And finally, our policymakers across the country can use the dashboard to get up-to-date information on ridership trends. We're posting new ridership data every single week. So how they can see how ridership is improving in different kinds of economies across the country.
Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what exactly is this thing that we've built together. So, it's hard, but there's no such thing as a silver lining in a pandemic. But the one good thing that has happened is that it's shaken the tech industry to start to share the data that we have for the public good. There's been much made. Both Apple and Google have shared aggregated information on how people are traveling. And so have we. If you haven't seen it in the past, it's transit.app/coronavirus. what this information shows is demand for public transit as compared to what it was prior to the pandemic. What we've been doing differentiates based on the audience that we're aiming at. So, what we've shown is available on a city by city basis. But what we realized at the start is that this information could be super useful to transit agencies as well, especially during the first few months of the pandemic when seemingly every agency was fare free and old ways of understanding demand didn't work anymore. So on that same page, which is still live and updated every hour, you can also see hourly trends for each agency. And we've been sharing even more detailed info with agencies and academics for the last 9 months. So while this data is great, it only represents demand. It's not calibrated to ridership. And so in APTA's call for partnership, we saw a possibility. Slide's been up for a minute now, but first a little bit about us. So we're the top ranked journey planning app in North America. Millions of users open the app each day. And it's that anonymized usage, the fact that we've got these users that we see as being a real-time indicator of the demand for transit. We also have a history of working with agencies. So 75 plus agencies have endorsed us as their official app, and we work with these agencies in a lot of different ways, not just to present fixed route information in our easy to use interface, but also to integrate their on-demand services like agency-run microtransit services, as well as bike and scooter share, car sharing, ride-hailing services, and initiatives like real-time and historical-based crowding predictions. The net is that based on APTA's call, we realized that a combination of the sources that we have, so that is the app usage data that transit has, but also the quarterly ridership reporting data that APTA collects, could create what is a unique resource. And that resource would not just be the demand for public transit as we manifested in our published indexed or Google's or Apple's, but that calibrated data that would predict ridership trends up to the moment for more than 100 transit agencies across the US. And that's kind of how this APTA ridership trends dashboard was born. So that's a concept. Let's go from there and take it to how it's implemented. So you take your verified ridership data, you calibrate it to our app usage data, and then you can use the app usage data essentially as a proxy for ridership. The advantage to that being that you get that app usage data instantly, as opposed to the ridership data, which takes months. The devil of how to do this, though, is in the details, and essentially there are two devils. The first is that when we have this APTA source data for a particular month, so let's say we're going back to March or August of 2020, when the data has already been reported. What we do there is we're able to solve the problem of adding more detail where that detail doesn't exist. Ridership isn't reported nationally or by agencies to the national reporting places on a weekly or a daily basis. But because of our reach, we know that demand is consistent over time. And so we use that to allocate monthly data to weekly. That is, if there's more app usage on before Thanksgiving and less on Thanksgiving, we can split that data up split the ridership data up based on that proportion. The second case here is when we don't yet have ridership data, and this is the main use case that we're trying to solve for in the APTA ridership trends. So using past data, we took a statistical look at how our demand correlates with agencies' measured ridership data. With the demand data that we'd published since March, we essentially assumed that this relationship was immutable. That is that the relationship between the use of our app and ridership didn't change, which is in essence an assumption that our app users were exactly representative of agencies' riders and that relationship doesn't change over time. We know, just like any place, that this isn't always the case. For example, our app tends to be most useful for bus riders. Metros are frequent enough that app usage is lower, and commuter rail tends to run towards schedule adherence rather than real-time information, so that we know that our app tends to overrepresent bus riders versus these other modes. So in cities with heavy commuter rail ridership, our drops in demand that we showed without calibrating this data were not as severe as the actual ridership later showed. But with this data from APTA combined and data on and our demand, we can look at the prior 3 years comparing these two sources to understand the relationship between them in any given city. And also look at various other factors, so the onset of the pandemic, whether agencies are collecting fares or running service at all for that matter, whether and when, for example, they've partnered with transit. It's great that agencies partner with us, but it does throw off the calibration with ridership because more people start to use it, even though there aren't more riders per se. So we need to adjust for those sorts of factors. And that allows us to adjust these estimates over time for each agency automatically. The net result is that we can now use the demand for the app to publish up-to-date information on estimated ridership for each agency where we have a sufficient amount of usage. And the variables, we use various different parts of the app, from how many times the app is open to how many different kinds of usage when people tap on the nearby screen. For those playing along at home and who love statistics, we use a ridge regression, which helps address the collinearity of the input variables, which includes, as I said before, I'm not quite sure how many people want to or did understand that, but we're happy to answer questions about that as well. And the model is validated by keeping out a certain number of months from the data training set. The result of this, and the thing that you need to know, is that the model is updated every week with an estimate of last week's ridership. So before I do the demo, just one quick thing. So the question is, why a weekly basis rather than a monthly or daily? And I think Goldilocks, as with everything, is very important. Goldilocks, it's also known in my household as Aristotle, the golden mean. So the idea is that monthly is not up to date enough for some of the use cases that Matt talked about at first, whereas daily reduces the number of agencies for which we can publish data. And it just becomes noisier for some of those agencies where usage may be lower. So weekly allows us to both aggregate enough data together in order to make it useful, but also it ignores some of the noise. Data, however, is available at other scales, and so if there are use cases or things that folks on the call are interested with, they can ask questions or just get in touch with us. So with that, let's take a look at the tool itself. And you can play along at home by using transitapp.com/APTA. So, one of the things that's been really important for us here is that in addition to providing accurate data, we want this to be easy to use. This tool is best when it's something that is used across the board. So the first thing that you see is the regional trends. This is compared to the prior year. So you can see nationally last week that we were at 33% of where we were last year, or down about 67% year over year. You can zoom in to see prior weeks. So if I want to zoom in to see only 4 weeks to really get a sense of what it's moving, you can see that over Christmas, we were only down 44%. And I think Matt will talk about that later nationally, why those trends manifest. I can also zoom out if I want to see the full scope of the last year. So if I like looking at that February, March cliff, I can see that cliff anytime I want by zooming out to 52 weeks to really get a sense of what happened to those trends in the first couple of weeks and what that meant over the course of the last 9 months of the pandemic. On the left side, I can look in addition to what I'm seeing here, which is the size by region. So here I can see, for example, that areas in the west central of the country have tended to have higher ridership relative throughout the pandemic. Again, something that Matt will talk to a little bit more. I can also look by agency. So you can see that by default, we select a few for you as comparisons that come across. But let's say I want to take a deeper look and I want to look at our great friends and great partners at the Greater Dayton Regional Transit Authority in Dayton to understand how they've measured up against everyone else. And you can see that, given the essential nature of their services, they've tended to have higher ridership than nationally throughout the course of the pandemic. I can also take a look, let's say I want to take a look at our friends at the Bi-State Development Corporation in St. Louis. I don't have to remember that that's their name, but I can just type in St. Louis and go and find them and add them to this graph to understand what it looks like. Additionally, if I want to get a sense of how this is looking versus a region, let's say I want to compare this to the West Central region, I can type that in up at the top, and I will find similarly all of those. So this is a great way of being able to compare over time, both regionally and against cohort agencies. So the next section, if I move down, allows me to drill down further in the data. So if the first section is the pretty graph section, the second section is the I love numbers section. In addition to relative terms, I can look at the absolute numbers each week. So we're making these predictions of absolute numbers on a week by week basis. I can also toggle to look at aggregates by city size, as I'm looking at here. So this is based on the size of the municipality, or by region. So there's similar regions as I saw before, so I can see the trends each particular week. I can also, if I look at the agencies, I can sort by the column headers, and I can see which agencies did best year over year last week. So here we can see that, the couple here who have been the least affected by the pandemic in the last week or so. The most powerful things here are the filters. So I want to be able to look at cohort agencies. So for example, let's say I want to see how agencies in small cities are doing. So I'm going to deselect everything except the smallest cities. And here I'm just going to be able to see all of these cities that are under 500,000 in population, or I just want to look at agencies on the West Coast in large cities, let's say. So I'll just take a look at Pacific, and I'll deselect everything here, and this will allow me to see mostly cities within Los Angeles and San Diego area, and to understand what that variation looks like within a particular area. So the idea here is really to allow you to have to cohort if you're an agency among yourself, or if you're someone looking elsewhere, to really get a sense of the trends. And if I want to go deeper, I can just download the data in the CSV format, and that updates every week as well. So that's the demo. We encourage you to walk through it yourselves. I believe that Matt posted the URL in the chat. And if you see something you've got questions about, just ask. The feedback that we've already gotten from agencies has improved the methodology. Our predictions have become more accurate since we started publishing it a couple of weeks back. And that's thanks to the feedback that we've gotten. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Matt.
Thanks. Just a reminder, if you have any questions about what you've heard so far, about something you're thinking about, feel free to use that Q&A button down at the bottom to ask them, and we'll have some time for questions at the end. We'll go through that and look at the questions that people have submitted. So as David said, we've noticed some interesting trends pop up in the dashboard, and I know a few people who have used the dashboard have noticed this too. One is that holiday weeks show little bumps in our ridership trend graph. So why is that? It's because we're measuring ridership compared to the same week the year prior. So the bump means that ridership is not down as much compared to other weeks. So perhaps the week before Labor Day, at this top agency in yellow is LA Metro, ridership was down, probably looks about like 42%. And then Labor Day week, or ridership was 42% of normal. And the week of Labor Day, it was maybe about 52% of normal. So that's probably due to the fact that riders are the riders who are using transit right now during the pandemic are continuing to use transit on holidays, which makes sense when we think about it, because right now the people using transit are more likely to be sort of essential workers, people who need to go to work, need to get those trips done, so they're using transit to do it. So that's why we see those little bumps, because in the sort of normal year that we're comparing to prior, ridership was down a little bit on those days because plenty of people who are riding transit have the day off. But this year, the people who are riding transit are still doing so. Next slide. So many of our transit agency members have noticed that ridership trends have been different across different transit modes, so between bus and rail. And we've seen that reflected in the ridership dashboard as well. We don't split out individual agency data by mode. And I think we could probably talk about why that is later in the question period. But here we have an example that is two agencies in the San Francisco area that operate distinct transit modes right now. So we have in blue is San Francisco Muni, which right now is operating bus service, mostly bus service, and the yellow line is San Francisco BART, which is operating heavy rail service. So what we've seen is that rail services in general have seen greater ridership decline compared to bus services, and longer distance services have seen greater decline than local transit services. So in this example, when we look at the two, the blue line, that's Muni, which is mostly bus service right now, has retained a higher percentage of their ridership than the longer distance heavy rail service in yellow. So that's because in blue, Muni is serving more local trips, more sort of shorter distance trips, and in yellow, BART is serving regions where car ownership is higher, so riders have more alternatives, and it traditionally has served more 9 to 5 commuter travel, so probably more workers who have the option to work from home right now. So this is just one way in which you can see how the modal trends are kind of playing out as the situation continues. We've also seen different ridership patterns in different regions. The mountain and west central regions did not see as much of a decline in ridership during the initial stages of the pandemic compared to other regions of the country, like the Northeast, where the greatest impacts of COVID-19 were seen initially. Those regions that had a less of an initial decline were able to retain more ridership, though the gap between them, you can see as you get out further towards September, October, the gap between the different regions has been reduced quite a bit. So we've seen that different regions have had different trends. For example, we've seen that Connecticut and DC have had some of the greatest ridership declines during the pandemic, while ridership in Kansas and Arizona has declined the least.
Thanks, Matt. So let me just end the presentation portion of this webinar by thanking the wonderful team at APTA and Transit who worked on this, especially Etienne Tremblay and Jonathan Sheff on the data, Emily Bonnier on the design, and Ilias Hall on the implementation, as well as, of course, Matt on absolutely everything else. Please ask your questions and comments in the QA. I see we've got about 15 or 20 of them, and keep them coming. Contact information for both Transit and APTA are on the next slide, which we'll keep up during the Q&A. And outside of this, we're happy to touch base with you on other things that we're doing during these times. The crowding prediction engine we built with our great partner in LA Metro and implemented with Pierce Transit and Big Blue Bus, among others, to the detailed dashboards that we offer for agencies that go so that they can understand how their users are traveling, origins and destinations in a live format. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Matt to take a look at the Q&A.
Sure. So now we'll answer some of the questions you all have asked so far. Just a reminder, you can still use that Q&A button below to ask a question if you still have one. So the first sort of related questions we have is what I alluded to earlier, which is why did we not split out different modes for individual agencies.
Yep.
So, David, you want to tackle that one?
Absolutely. So some of that has to do with the way the app itself works. When you open up the app, you are able to see significant, you're able to see all modes together. And the data that we have that has the highest sample size is on folks who are just opening the app and then closing it. We want to use that because we want to use the most anonymous data possible. We also use data in here on what people click into, that is what they tap onto a nearby screen to see the location of the vehicle or to go from one prediction to the next 3 or 5 predictions. So in theory, it is possible for us to dig into it, especially for larger systems, like all of the ones that I think were mentioned in some of these questions, whether it's New York City and the MTA and rail versus bus or subway, or the SEPTA rail system, WMATA, or the MBTA. We wanted to start with what we've got here, but I would encourage you that if you're interested in specific numbers, to reach out to us, and we'll figure out if we can put them together. Also, if you're a particular agency and you're interested in what those, what the data looks like on a particular route, we can also provide that information all the way down to that level of detail as needed. But we think that the numbers that we've presented here are best for looking at the overall trends and are the ones that, for us, we wanted to make sure that we got these right first. But I think it's exciting to think about what else can happen with all of this.
Great, thanks. Somebody asks, this is incredible. Is this new? Is it available to APTA members? Well, it is. It's available to everyone to use. And I will repost the link in the chat app so that you can check it out too. Yeah, we wanted to make this available to everyone to make sure that we could make it as useful as possible for the whole industry while we're all going through this the pandemic that we've been experiencing. It's we're coming up on 11 months now, so we wanted to make it available for everyone to use this valuable resource. So it's not just for APTA members, it's for the general public as well. Somebody asks, are any agencies utilizing this data spatially via ArcGIS? Is the data of it in a spatially consumable format?
So this data, that's a great question. This data, it starts with a spatially consumable format, but this data is aggregated to the the agency or the city or the region wide level, and so therefore it's not available. However, if you work with us, we do have spatially available data, including including data that we've analyzed. So it's got origins and destinations and is more validated, and so. If you're an agency who's interested in it, just drop us a line, and we're happy to talk to you more about that.
Great. Let's see. Somebody else asked a bit of an in the weeds question. Has this methodology been put forward as a candidate for NTD reporting yet? If so, has it been approved for this purpose? I don't know that, but do you know the answer to that? But
no,
I don't believe it has, and I don't think it could be used for NTD reporting. But
in this particular case, no. But I think that there's an interesting larger question there, which is NTD reporting has traditionally come from fare collection data or APC data, and there hasn't the methodologies change from time to time. It'd be really interesting to see if we could use some of these newer sources of data like this app usage data and verify it so that it could in fact be used for reporting or for other things as well. I mean, that doesn't just go for reporting, but there's survey and equity analysis that I think that the FTA requirements on some of those have kept agencies from using some of these newer methods that are available because of apps like transit and otherwise. And I think that would be super interesting to pursue, whether there's more of an ability to use these data sets, because I think that that could help agencies move forward as quickly as they've been moving forward, since the pandemic hit. The reporting requirements can hold them back from some of the things that they want to be doing. So be super interesting to progress on that.
Maybe it's the next step. Many agencies have shifted to passenger counters rather than using their fare boxes. Maybe this is a next data source for the future.
Yeah.
Jack asks, will a similar dashboard be developed for Canadian transit agencies?
I don't know. Have you talked to CUDA, Matt?
I have not. We collect some information on Canadian on ridership at Canadian agencies, so we may be able to add some agencies to the dashboard depending on who we have information for.
And we have the same data, so as long as we can get the kinds of monthly data that APTA is able to source, we can work with APTA for the ones that APTA collects, or we'd love to work with CUDA or other organizations within Transit's home base of Canada in order to collect this information and publish it. It's just as important for Canadians as it is for people from the United States.
Great. Let's see. What else do we have here? Someone observes, it looks like small agencies under 500,000 outperformed large agencies over 2 million from mid-March to late August. Since early September, they've equilibrated and stayed in lockstep. Any hypotheses? We also saw this in our before we launched this dashboard in our quarterly ridership reporting. And one of our hypotheses was that larger cities had more sort of office workers riding transit, people who were probably working from home initially, and sort of that initially those many more people in those largest cities were just staying home all the time. And then as the pandemic kind of progressed, some of those people started returning to work on some days. Whereas in smaller cities, we saw more sort of more of the transit using public who have different kinds of jobs where they necessarily didn't have the option to work from home. So they maybe were still going to work even in the early stages of the pandemic. So that was one hypothesis we had as to why that difference was. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, David.
No, I think you covered it really well.
Somebody says, regarding the composition of ridership, do you actually have data on the demographics of riders, or is your comment on essential workers making up a greater percentage of total riders just based on what we know anecdotally? It's a bit of both. We do have some information on demographics of ridership, and APTA has put out some reports in the past about who rides public transportation. And part of that, and part of it is anecdotal. So seeing what's happening with the ridership trends, and seeing sort of what we've heard from agencies on the ground about who is using transit, who's still going to work, things like that. So whether it's what you consider your sort of traditional essential workers, or people for whom going to work is essential, or their trips are essential every day, those are the people who are using transit right now more so than prior to the pandemic. What do you like here? What do you see that's interesting?
Yeah, let me just add to that, which is to say that transit, we've also done a couple of surveys of our riders throughout, of our users throughout this. So, back in April and May, we did a survey of about 25,000 riders across the US to understand it. So I think we feel pretty confident that the data that this is mainly essential workers is not just anecdotal, and we can post a link to the webinar and results from that within here as well, because I think that the data pretty well supports the comment about and the assumption about essential workers. Next question that I see on here that's interesting maybe is about the smaller agencies. So there's a question of smaller agencies that aren't currently on the dashboard. If so, would it be possible to include them in the near future? Another person says that they don't see their agency listed. So in general, what we've done is we've been relatively conservative in only including agencies where we feel confident that the predictions have a relatively small margin of error. If you're don't see yourself on here, reach out to us, and a couple have been able to do so, and we've been able to add agencies along the way by taking a look and looking deeper to make sure. We've done some exclusion just to make sure that we were right, but we can always add back in as we work more closely with you. So just reach out to us, and we'll see if we can get you added back on there.
Yep, and I'll add we have already had a few agencies reach out to us at our contact information below, asking about, I don't see myself in here. What's up? And we've added some agencies based on finding some more information about it. So definitely reach out. Has there been any trends as transit have added occupancy features into the app that would cause users to be dissuaded from taking public transportation? I don't know what that question.
Yeah, I think that what we've seen is just the opposite. Is that it's people assume that public transportation is too crowded, and what occupancy information does is it assuages their fear so that they feel better about it. I've got one that is from Molly. Can you present the margin of error based on historical agency reported numbers? The CTA is off for 3 to 5%. The margin of error does vary depending upon the agency itself and the consistency thereof. Essentially, we've shot to get it below that 3 to 5%. Smaller agencies tend to be slightly higher, and we know that the CTA on the larger agency side is at the higher end of the spectrum. But also, I can follow up on this, or we can follow up on this directly, and if anyone's interested in what the margin of errors look like for their particular agency, we can follow up with you directly. But it does vary based on the size.
Somebody else asks, is there a quick way to see which agencies are located in which region? I think if you go down below the graph, that's the chart that's on the dashboard, to the specific, hey, there we go, to the specific agency, like the numbers page, it shows you which region each agency it is in.
There we go. I've got one from Mike, who asks, is there an effect in minority neighborhoods where routes with customers who are less likely to use a transit app or smartphones in general are underrepresented in the ridership data? So what we've seen on here is in fact the opposite. And we've got survey data, and there's another survey that we had in the field at the end of the year, which we'll be reporting on next week, which actually shows that the usage of transit app, contrary to the, I think, widely held perception, is that the usage of transit app actually tends to be poorer and more minority than the usage of public transportation even as a whole. And that's simply because apps like the transit app are most useful for those people who take the bus. And so our population in the sample tends to look the most like bus riders rather than, for example, like metro riders in DC.
Let's see. Maybe here's another question about, I know you all we had a question about crowding information. Do you have the ability to show real-time APC crowding info from GTFS real-time feeds, or is it coming from
Yep.
somewhere else.
Yep. So we show the information for somewhere between 30 to 40 agencies who distribute that information, in addition to working with agencies who haven't been able to distribute that in order to create predictions from their past APC data. So we both ingest the data for those agencies, but we know that of the hundreds of agencies in the US, less than 10% have been able to publish real-time APC data. So we do all of that, but then we also make sure that we can add on top of that because we think it's important. I've got one that I think is interesting and super nerdy, which is, do you have any APIs available so that we can bypass the manual effort of downloading the CSV? Thank you for that. So, just get in touch with us directly, and we'll help you figure out how to make whatever you need work. It comes from an API, so we haven't published anything publicly, but it shouldn't be too difficult. And anonymous, whoever you are, just reach out to us, and we'll be happy to do something there.
Great. Oh, somewhat. Another anonymous user says, "Do you have enough data to predict what ridership will be in 6 months or a year?" The question everyone wants to answer. What is
Do you have a
going to
crystal
happen?
ball?
Do you have
Yes.
that, David? Can you get us
No.
that? No.
No. So, but it is useful here because I think this can help kind of elucidate how this data comes. So the reason that we're able to show you what happened last week, and the reason we call it a prediction, is because it isn't actual verified NTD data yet. But because we're using the data that happened last week, we are then able to translate that into the ridership data. So we're able to translate it from app usage data into ridership data. So luckily, in order to produce all of the data here, we don't actually need any sort of crystal ball. We can do it just looking backwards, but just using a source of data that is much more up to date, and using that as an analog for the data that we're interested in.
Mm-hmm. And I think I'll add to that to say that I hope that as things start to improve over, hopefully the next few months, 6 months, we will see sort of bigger changes in ridership start to happen, and that will give us a better idea of what's going to happen in the next 6 months, a year, several years down the line. I know right now, we sort of there's a lot of uncertainty about what might happen, but I think one of the great uses of this tool will be able to see, like, when things start to improve, how quickly are they improving, and that will help us make predictions about what's going to happen even further down the line.
Yeah.
I had one and then I lost it. Someone asked, who should we contact if we want to be included or talk about whether we're included or not in the dashboard? We have 2 email addresses right here on the screen right now at the bottom of this slide, and partners at transit.app and statistics@apta.com, and you can email either of those or both of them, and we will get back to you about how we can include you in the dashboard if you're not already.
Great. Let's do one last one, and then we can. There's more questions, but people can reach out to us directly, and we can give people back some of their time. I guess Darren asks, could you break it down by rush hour versus non-rush hour too, or is that not possible? And the answer is, if we think it's useful, absolutely. That's information that we have. If you want to reach out to us and talk to us about the use cases, we'd be happy to either produce it for you or figure out if it's something that's useful, and produce it so that it's something that's reported on a weekly basis. And in general, for folks who are curious about it, Matt just read out the email addresses. Email either or both of them. It'll get to us, and we'll figure out how to continue to improve this. The goal from APTA and from Transit, I think, on this was really to provide a resource that helps agencies and business users and the media and sort of everyone do their job better. And so if there's more information on national trends that will help you do your job better, that's something that we'd love to do. And if it's something that's local, if you reach out to Transit, we have much more disaggregate data, on routes, on origins, destinations, et cetera. And we're happy to work with you on that as well.
Definitely. All right, so that's it, I think, for today's webinar. Please join me in thanking the rest of the team from APTA and everybody at Transit for all the work that they put into our APTA ridership trends dashboard, and their help in putting together today's webinar. To the audience, thank you for your excellent questions. And if you have any more, definitely email us. So we hope the ridership trends dashboard provides you with some valuable insight as transit ridership recovers. So thank you very much.